You ever seen 3 HOA board members roll up on a man like a SWAT team, just because he's holding a fishing rod? I have. And I was that man. One minute, I'm sipping black coffee by the lake behind my cabin, listening to loons echo across the water. The next, a trio of self-important suburban tyrants screeches up in a golf cart like they're about to bust a meth lab. The leader, a bleach-blonde woman with wraparound sunglasses and a laminated clipboard, points at me like I just committed a felony. "Sir, you are in violation of HOA Code 7B.5, unauthorized recreational angling." I almost dropped my pole laughing. That was the moment I realized these people weren't just annoying, they were dangerous in the way only power-drunk volunteers can be. And they had no idea who they were messing with. It was a quiet Sunday morning, blue sky, calm water, just the soft lap of the lake against my dock. I had my usual setup: a fold-out chair, my dad's old tackle box, and a cup of gas station coffee that somehow always tasted better outdoors. Fishing wasn't just a hobby, it was my ritual, my church, my therapy. That lake had been behind my property since I bought this cabin 10 years ago. It wasn't a question of ownership or privilege. It was just part of life out here. Until Karen and her minions decided otherwise. The golf cart tires crunched the gravel path with an air of fake authority. Karen, who I'd seen before screaming at kids for riding scooters too fast, was now apparently the sheriff of aquatic justice. Flanking her were 2 other HOA board members. One guy who always wore socks with sandals and a woman who once filed a noise complaint against a wind chime. Together, they looked like the worst Avengers reboot ever conceived. Karen stepped off the cart like she was descending from a chariot, flipped her clipboard open, and dramatically pointed to my fishing rod. "Do you have a valid HOA fishing tag?" she asked. I blinked at her. Didn't know I needed one to sit on my own dock. "It's not your dock," she sniffed. "That lake is community property, and the board recently passed a resolution to require fishing permit. For wildlife protection." "Wildlife protection?" I raised an eyebrow. "Lady, the only thing I've ever seen in this lake are frogs, 3 ducks, and a catfish with a limp." Karen ignored that and slapped a yellow notice against my chest. "You've been cited. $600 fine. Further violations will result in legal action." I couldn't help it, I laughed. Not a chuckle, but a full-blown, belly-deep, this can't be real kind of laugh. She actually looked offended. "You think this is funny?" "I think it's absurd," I said, folding up my chair and standing. "I've been fishing here for 10 years. This isn't a clubhouse pool. It's a lake. Who even owns it?" "The HOA manages this land," she said smugly. "Which means it falls under our rules." That night, I got home to find a bright orange warning slapped to my front door, as if I'd been caught cooking meth in the woods. The letter threatened escalating fines, legal action, and potential suspension of my community privileges. I stared at it for a long moment, then crumpled it up and tossed it in the trash. I wasn't angry yet, but I was very, very curious. The next day, I noticed new signs had appeared overnight. Big, bold letters read, "Fishing prohibited. Violators will be fined." One was installed directly next to my dock. Another was mounted along the tree line where I usually parked my canoe. I took a deep breath, walked back inside, and made a phone call I hadn't made in a long time. My lawyer, Barry, was an old friend from college who usually helped me with business filings. He picked up on the second ring. "Dean, if this is about the time I told your ex that she could keep the dog, I'm still sorry." "Not that," I said. "I want you to look up something for me. The lake behind my cabin. I need to know who owns it. Really owns it." There was a pause. "You thinking lawsuit?" "Not exactly," I said. "I'm thinking checkbook." By Tuesday, Barry had an answer, and it wasn't what either of us expected. Turns out, the lake wasn't technically HOA property. It had been part of a large land deal 30 years ago when the neighborhood was still a patch of dirt lots and zoning proposals. The lake had been leased to the original developer for community use, but the option to purchase it outright was never finalized. The holding company that still held the deed had gone dormant. The land, technically, was still up for grabs. They think they own the lake, Barry said, but nobody ever actually bought it. I leaned back in my chair and grinned. What would it take to buy it now? He whistled. You'd need to find the successor to the holding company and make a formal offer. But it's doable. And based on how badly they've mismanaged the documentation, I doubt anyone else knows it's available. It was the first time in a while I felt genuinely excited. Fishing had always been about peace and solitude for me, but now it was about something else entirely. Principle. The HOA thought they could bully, fine, and intimidate whoever they wanted. But they didn't count on one of their violators having enough patience, money, and legal know-how to flip the entire game board on them. 2 days later, the paperwork was moving. I kept quiet, played dumb when Karen drove by scowling in her cart. She even waved once, smugly. Meanwhile, I was signing the first draft of a property acquisition proposal. Barry called it a surgical strike. I called it poetic. A week later, as I stood once again on my dock, rod in hand and sun on my back, I looked at the new, "Fishing Prohibited," sign beside me and grinned. They wanted to play territorial? Fine. They picked the wrong fisherman. Because in 2 weeks' time I wouldn't just be fishing on that lake, I'd be owning it. And when I did, every single one of their little plastic rules would sink to the bottom faster than a cinder block in a rainstorm. The satisfaction of knowing I was about to turn the entire HOA's fake little empire upside down was better than any fish I could have caught that week. As Barry worked the legal angles like a chess master, I kept my head down and played it cool. I went for walks, waved to neighbors, and even attended the next HOA meeting just to listen. Karen sat at the head of the table in the community center with her trademark smug expression, basking in the illusion of authority as she read off a list of new lake enforcement guidelines. They included kayak sticker registration, approved times for shoreline access, and a dress code for water-based activities. Dress code. For the lake. I nearly choked on my free punch. But the best part? Not a single word about the lake's actual ownership. They all assumed the HOA owned it, or that someone else had taken care of it ages ago. Karen had become so obsessed with appearances and control that she'd never questioned the foundation of her power. She thought paperwork made her a queen. Meanwhile, Barry had just finalized the offer. The dormant holding company was owned by an elderly couple living in Florida, who were stunned to hear someone still wanted the property. They'd inherited it from a cousin and assumed it was just worthless wetlands. Barry's offer included enough cash to make it a no-brainer. Within days, we had signatures. The moment I held the deed in my hands, I felt something shift. It was like standing on solid ground after a storm. No more pretending. No more asking permission. I owned the lake. Not leased it, not rented a dock, not held community privileges. It was mine. Shoreline to shoreline, including the 10-foot buffer zone around the water. The same buffer where the HOA had installed their snarky little signs and positioned their kayak rack. Now they were technically trespassing on my land. And I couldn't wait to let them know. I didn't go public right away. That would have been too easy. Instead, I called up a local sign company and ordered 12 large, handcrafted wooden signs with bold, rustic lettering. They weren't just warnings. They were statements. The kind you plant into the ground like a battle flag. Each one read, "Private property. No trespassing. Residents not welcome. Violators will be prosecuted." I picked a stained wood finish, almost decorative, to make them look both charming and terrifying. Then I hired a crew from the next town over, guys the HOA had never seen before, to install them along the lake's perimeter at dawn. By 8 in the morning, the neighborhood group chat was on fire. People were posting photos of the signs, panicking, confused, tagging Karen and demanding answers. I sat on my porch with a fresh cup of coffee, watching the chaos unfold like it was morning television. Around 9, I heard the unmistakable whine of Karen's golf cart peeling down the road. She didn't stop at my house. She beelined straight for the lake, where 2 of the signs were installed near the community kayak launch. Her voice carried all the way across the water. What is this? Who authorized this? Who is Dean to put up signs? He doesn't own this. I walked down to meet her, letting the silence do the heavy lifting until I was close enough for her to see the folder in my hand. Karen spun toward me, finger already raised, ready to accuse. Dean, you can't just. I held up the folder and opened it, showing her the deed. Stamped. Recorded. Finalized. Her mouth snapped shut. I don't need to just do anything, I said calmly. This land? This lake? It's mine. Purchased legally, documented officially. The HOA never bought it. The previous owner sold it to me. The signs are legally enforceable, and you're standing on private property. She blinked like she'd just been slapped by a fish. That's impossible. We've used this lake for years. Using something and owning something are 2 very different things, I said. You've been using it under the false assumption that it was HOA managed. Turns out, nobody bothered to check the paperwork. Until I did. Karen's face flushed redder than a summer sunburn. She tried to pivot. Fine, then we'll call the city and seize it. This is a public interest matter. We'll. I laughed, shaking my head. Eminent domain doesn't work like that. This isn't a highway expansion. The city's not going to lift a finger to steal a lake from a private citizen just because your neighborhood board has an ego problem. Her voice cracked. You can't just ban people. You'll have the entire community furious. I leaned in slightly, voice low and amused. Oh, I know. That's the best part. By noon, the signs had drawn small crowds of curious residents. Some were angry. Others just looked stunned. I let them come up to me, one by one, and I explained everything. Calmly. Rationally. You've been lied to, I said. This lake was never HOA property. I just happened to notice the legal loophole before anyone else did. Now, unfortunately, due to recent events and ongoing harassment, I've decided to restrict access. It's not personal. It's just policy. Same way the HOA likes it. Karen stormed back to the clubhouse and immediately called an emergency board meeting. I wasn't invited, obviously, but I heard plenty through the grapevine. She wanted to file an injunction, sue me for community theft, and even proposed trying to pass a special resolution declaring the lake as neighborhood domain. All of it was laughed down, especially after Barry sent a cease and desist letter to the entire board, complete with deed copies and a friendly reminder that slander would be met with defamation claims. Rick, one of Karen's loyal board buddies, tried to act tough the next morning. He marched up to the edge of the lake with a fishing pole and dared me to stop him. I simply called the sheriff's office and handed them a copy of the deed when they arrived. Rick got a trespassing warning and a very expensive lesson in what happens when you push your luck with a legal landowner. Things were escalating fast, and I could see the cracks forming. Karen was losing her grip. The community was split between people who thought I was a genius and those who blamed me for taking away their lake days. But that didn't bother me, because this wasn't about popularity. It was about principle. And besides, I hadn't even started the best part yet. Because what Karen and the HOA didn't know, what I had planned next, would make those wooden signs look like polite suggestions. I wasn't just going to own the lake. I was going to monetize it. And the HOA? They'd be the only people who couldn't buy in. The day after Rick got slapped with a trespassing warning, the HOA's meltdown kicked into full gear. It was as if Karen had lit a fuse under her own leadership, and now the whole board was running around like a bunch of headless chickens in khakis and branded polos. I heard they held a private emergency session in the clubhouse where Karen dramatically stood up, pounded her gavel, and declared war. Not metaphorical war, actual war. Her words. "We are under siege," she apparently told them, voice trembling with righteous fury. This is an invasion of our lifestyle, and I will not back down. To her, it wasn't about fishing rights or legal ownership anymore. It had become a matter of ego, of reclaiming her imagined throne. Problem was, the troops weren't exactly lining up behind her. Word had spread quickly about what actually happened. My signed deed, the years-long HOA oversight, Barry's cease and desist letter. People were beginning to realize that Karen had acted on assumptions, not facts, and now their summer plans were evaporating faster than the morning mist off the lake. No more kayaking, no paddle boards, no lazy floating on giant flamingo inflatables. The community had just been locked out of its own jewel, and most folks were starting to understand exactly who was to blame. I wasn't celebrating, though. Not yet. There was still too much fallout to observe. For one thing, the HOA hadn't completely accepted defeat. Karen still believed she could force my hand by weaponizing public pressure. She started a campaign called Reclaim Our Lake, complete with flyers, a printed newsletter, and even a Facebook group where she posted long-winded rants filled with phrases like irresponsible land hoarding and betrayal of neighborly trust. I read it all while drinking coffee from a mug that said, "World's Most Hated Angler." Then came the real escalation, sabotage. It started small. One morning, I walked down to my dock and found the ropes to my canoe had been sliced. Clean cut. Nothing floated away, thankfully, but it sent a message. The next night, someone dumped what smelled suspiciously like rotten eggs all over the welcome mat of my cabin. A week later, I found sugar poured into the gas tank of my fishing boat. That one hit hard. It wasn't just annoying, it was dangerous. I had to drain and clean the entire engine system to prevent permanent damage. That's when I installed cameras. Barry and I had a long conversation after that. I wasn't someone who liked getting law enforcement involved unless it was necessary, but this had crossed the line. He advised me to keep records, timestamp everything, and let the HOA keep digging their own grave. He was right, because 2 nights later, my new security footage captured a very familiar figure creeping through the shadows near my boathouse. Hoodie pulled over his head, flashlight in one hand, what looked like bolt cutters in the other. He was halfway through slashing my secondary dock line when I hit the alarm from my phone. The high-pitched wail shattered the lake's quiet. Rick bolted like a teenager toilet papering the wrong house, tripping on the rocks as he ran. I didn't chase him. I didn't have to. The sheriff's office had a copy of the footage within the hour, and the next day Rick got served with a misdemeanor citation. His HOA buddies tried to spin it like he was inspecting storm damage. No one bought it. I printed the screenshots from the security cam footage and hand-delivered copies to every mailbox in the community. On the back I wrote, "Private property means private rules. Respect the line or pay the fine." That flyer went viral in our town's Nextdoor app within hours. The comments section lit up with people debating whether the HOA had gone too far, or whether I had. But something had shifted. People weren't mad at me anymore. They were mad at the board. Especially Karen. In a last-ditch effort to rally her base, Karen organized a Lake Rights Awareness March on a Saturday morning. She and a small group of loyalists, mostly board retirees and her weekly book club, marched down the road with homemade signs that read things like "Water for All" and "No Tyrants on the Shore." They reached the edge of the lake only to be met by 2 uniformed deputies and a printed copy of my trespass policy stapled to a post. I wasn't even there. I was in town buying supplies for the next phase of my plan. But someone snapped a picture of Karen being turned away from the lake she once called the heart of our community. That image became an instant meme. The following week, Karen called a full HOA meeting, promising a vote to override the board and take legal action against me. What she didn't count on was how fractured the board had become. Half of them had already started distancing themselves from her. The rest were tired of looking like fools. When she presented her plan to hire an attorney and sue me for public use obstruction, she didn't even get a second on the motion. Silence filled the room. Then came the bombshell. An older resident named Mr. Phelps, quiet, soft-spoken, always wore the same fishing hat, stood up and cleared his throat. "Karen," he said, "you told us this lake was HOA property. You told us Dean was breaking rules. Turns out, none of that was true. And now you're costing this neighborhood more than we can afford, financially and otherwise. I think it's time someone else ran this place." The room went still. Karen blinked. Her gavel tapped nervously against the table. But no one came to her defense. Later that evening, I got a knock on the door. It was Marcia, one of the board members who'd always been more of a fence-sitter. She handed me a cupcake with blue frosting and a sheepish grin. "Don't ask why," she said. "Just congratulations. Also, Karen's resigning. Effective next week." I took the cupcake, closed the door, and stood on my porch looking out at the moonlight glinting off the water. Peace had returned, temporarily. But I knew Karen. She wasn't going to let this end quietly. She might have been voted out, but she wasn't the type to just fade into the shadows. She was plotting something. She had to be. But I was already a step ahead. Because while she was busy organizing marches and Facebook posts, I'd been working on something else entirely. Something that would make the lake not just mine legally, but mine economically. Soon, this wasn't going to be a lake the HOA lost. It was going to be the one lake they could never get back. The dust hadn't even fully settled from Karen's resignation before I started the next phase of my plan. Owning the lake had been satisfying, no doubt, but I wasn't in this just for revenge. I wanted something more permanent, something that would outlast the HOA's rotating board members and their thirst for control. If they couldn't respect private ownership, then they'd learn to respect private enterprise. I wasn't just going to sit on this lake like some hermit with a grudge. I was going to turn it into a thriving, members-only business, one that included everyone except the very people who had tried to run me off the water. I called it Lake Liberty. The name wasn't just branding, it was a declaration. I filed for the business license under that name, built a clean, simple website, and started assembling a team to help develop the shoreline. A local contractor named Vince helped me design a modest but charming dockside lodge. It wasn't anything extravagant, just a well-built, two-room structure with a rental booth, storage shed, and a cozy patio with rocking chairs overlooking the water. We added an electronic gate and a fence along the primary access trail, leaving a single road open for incoming guests. The signs were updated too. Now they read, Lake Liberty Private Club, membership required. HOA residents excluded by policy. I knew exactly what kind of reaction that line would trigger, and that's what made it perfect. This wasn't just about creating a lake club. It was about drawing a line in the sand, or in this case, the shoreline. I wasn't barring people arbitrarily. I was excluding a group that had shown nothing but entitlement and hostility. And this time, the law was entirely on my side. Within a week of the website going live, membership applications started rolling in. Families from surrounding neighborhoods, veterans, fishermen, paddleboarders, even a few travel bloggers all wanted in. I kept the pricing reasonable, an annual membership that covered maintenance, access, and basic rentals. I offered discounted day passes for seniors and free fishing permits for veterans and first responders. The local buzz picked up fast. By the end of the month, we had 50 members and a waiting list. My little lake had become a hidden gem, and Karen's worst nightmare. Of course, she didn't stay quiet for long. Despite her resignation, she still lived just down the street, and from what I heard, she was foaming at the mouth every time she passed the new "Residents Not Welcome" sign. Then came the inevitable confrontation. One hot afternoon, I was restocking fishing lures in the lodge when I heard a commotion by the gate. Karen had shown up in full summer gear, sun hat, visor, bright pink water bottle, and was demanding entry. Two of my employees, a retired Coast Guard guy named Hal and a college student named Mia, were standing firm at the entrance. I stepped outside and waved. Can I help you, Karen? Her voice rose like a kettle about to blow. This is a disgrace, Dean. I demand access to the lake. You may have tricked some paper pushers into handing you a deed, but you cannot ban people based on residency. That's discrimination. I motioned to the large sign next to her head. It's a private club, just like your HOA pool is a private amenity. You restricted access to me for years. Now the shoe's just on the other foot. She crossed her arms. You're going to get sued. I held up a laminated copy of the membership policy. All legal. All compliant. Would you like me to read you the trespass laws again? She glared at me like she was trying to ignite me with her pupils. Enjoy your little lake, she spat. It won't last. Then she stormed off, knocking over a rack of brochures on her way out. I watched her retreat with a mixture of amusement and pity. She still believed she could win a fight she'd already lost. But the community around her was changing fast. With Karen out, the new HOA president, a reasonable guy named Leonard, was trying to rebuild trust with the neighborhood. He quietly approached me one evening with a handshake and an apology. We got caught up in the wrong fight, he said. Honestly, I think most folks just want to move on. I respected that. But I wasn't about to undo my new rules. Leonard understood. Can't say I'd do it any different if I were in your shoes, he admitted. But is there any way we could work out a limited partnership? Like a neighborhood day once a year? Something symbolic. I thought about it for a moment, then nodded. Maybe. Let's see how the summer goes. Word of our conversation must have gotten around, because suddenly I wasn't public enemy number one anymore. People started waving again. Some even stopped by the fence to ask about memberships for friends or relatives. Meanwhile, business was booming. We held our first Freedom Fest weekend on the 4th of July, complete with live music, barbecue, and kayak races. Over 300 visitors came through, and we raised nearly $2,000 for a local veterans charity. The news ran a segment on it. Man reclaims lake from HOA, turns it into private paradise, the headline read. My inbox exploded. Even folks from HOA neighborhoods who'd never heard of ours began reaching out. They shared stories of petty fines, landscaping wars, and nosy board members with too much time on their hands. One guy sent me a photo of his unauthorized birdbath that got him a citation. Another told me about how he was once fined for hanging his American flag crooked. I couldn't believe how widespread it was. That's when I knew Lake Liberty wasn't just a personal project anymore, it was a symbol. And just as expected, the only people not celebrating were Karen and her inner circle. I heard she was trying to form a residents' coalition to pressure the new board into challenging me again. But no one was biting. The more she yelled, the more isolated she became. Her own allies had either moved away or turned against her. She'd been dethroned, exiled, and now shut out of the very thing she once used to lord over others. As I stood one evening by the fire pit near the lodge, watching the orange glow dance across the water, I couldn't help but reflect on how quickly everything had turned. A year ago, I was just a guy trying to fish in peace. Now I was a club owner, a community symbol, and the unintentional face of resistance against HOA overreach. I didn't set out to be a rebel. But when someone pushes you hard enough, sometimes your only option is to push back harder. And I still had one final surprise left. Something Karen wouldn't see coming. Something that would make it absolutely clear. Lake Liberty wasn't just off-limit. It was untouchable. The morning the final sign went up was calm and quiet, like the lake itself knew what was about to happen. There was no ceremony, no press, no announcement. Just me, a cordless drill, and a sign that had taken weeks to design, carve, and finish. I placed it right at the center dock, where Karen and the old HOA board used to launch their little paddle boats and act like monarchs of a plastic kingdom. The sign read simply, Private Lake, Club members only, HOA officials permanently banned. Enjoy the view from afar. It was stained dark oak, with brass trim, and beneath the message, a carved base leaped over the words like punctuation on a perfect sentence. I stepped back and admired it as the early sunlight shimmered across the water. People came and went that day like usual. Visitors checked in at the lodge, a family unloaded kayaks from a roof rack, and 2 veterans from the local American Legion chapter pulled up with folding chairs and fishing rods. There was peace here now, real peace, the kind that didn't require compromise. The lodge had become more than a business. It was a gathering place, a small ecosystem where people appreciated the land, respected the rules, and left things better than they found them. I hired local teens for summer jobs and kept discounts rolling for first responders and teachers. For everyone else, the rates were fair and the environment welcoming. Everyone, that is, except the ones who once thought they could run this place like it was their private fiefdom. Karen hadn't been seen around the lake in weeks, but her name still came up now and then. People would whisper about her like she was some retired villain from a comic book, once feared, now just a sad memory. Rumor had it she'd tried to start a competing nature club at a nearby retention pond, but that fell apart after she got into a shouting match with a city worker over mosquito fogging. Her reputation was shot, and her reach had withered. What she hadn't realized until it was too late was that her power had never come from rules or signs or meetings. It came from people agreeing to follow her. The moment they stopped, she was just another person with a clipboard and a bad attitude. The HOA itself had gone through a quiet reformation. Leonard, the new president, was more focused on community gardening and fixing potholes than micromanaging lawn gnomes. He even stopped by the lake one afternoon, not as a negotiator but as a visitor. He walked the edge, read the signs, and gave me a small nod as he passed. That was it. No fanfare, no apologies. Just a moment of quiet understanding between 2 men who'd seen what unchecked power could do to a neighborhood. But the final act in this saga wasn't complete until the town's annual community showcase day arrived. It was a quirky local tradition where businesses, parks, and clubs set up booths to promote what they offered. Lake Liberty had been invited to participate for the first time. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I accepted and set up a simple table with photos of the lake, brochures, a little tackle display, and a banner that read, "Freedom to Fish." We weren't offering anything fancy, just a raffle for a free weekend pass and a sign-up sheet for next season's membership list. Then, like clockwork, Karen showed up. I spotted her across the lot, trying to blend in with a wide-brimmed hat and oversized sunglasses, but her tense posture gave her away. She wandered through booths, talking to a few folks, clearly hoping someone would bring up the lake. No one did. Eventually, she made her way to my table, looking over the display like a food critic examining a cheeseburger. "I heard your club's doing well," she said coolly, pretending to flip through a brochure. "Better than expected," I replied. "We had to add a wait list last month." She gave a half-laugh, the kind people do when they're dying inside but don't want to show it. Must be exhausting, keeping it all up. Managing people. Rules. Upkeep. Paperwork. I leaned on the table and smiled. You'd be surprised how smoothly things run when the rules make sense and people actually want to follow them. Her jaw tightened. You know, I never meant for it to get this far. It was just about protecting community standards. Karen, I said, dropping the act, you tried to find me for fishing, on land I'd maintained for 10 years. You taped threats to my door, rallied a mob, and let someone vandalize my property. All because I didn't buy your fake fishing permit. She stared at me, then looked away. That lake was part of our identity. Maybe, I said, but you treated it like your throne. There was a long silence. Then she picked up one of the raffle cards, scribbled something on the back, and walked away without another word. When I flipped it over later, it just said, "You win." I didn't keep the card. I didn't need to. The entire lake was proof enough. The showcase ended with our booth taking second place for Most Popular Local Feature, behind only the town bakery. I could live with that. That night, I returned home, poured myself a cold drink, and walked down to the dock. The sky had turned soft and gold, the kind of sunset that made you forget the nonsense you'd endured to reach that moment. I sat down, cast a line, and let the quiet take over. There was no longer any urgency. No HOA politics. No shouting. Just me, the water, and a lake that was finally, irrevocably mine. Lake Liberty stood not as a monument to revenge, but as a sanctuary built from persistence and principle. And maybe a little pettiness, sure, but earned, measured, and channeled into something lasting. A few kids rode by on bikes, waving as they passed. One of them shouted, "Hey Mr. Dean, you really own a whole lake?" I laughed. "Yup. All of it." They disappeared down the road, and I leaned back with a grin. I never planned to own a lake. I just wanted to fish in peace. But sometimes, when people try to push you out of the water, the best thing you can do is buy the whole thing and build a pier that says, "No bullies allowed."